It was said that the midnight funeral drum had been in the village of Alakoro for as long as anyone could remember. Its deep, resonant beat echoed through the night, carrying with it the power of both life and death. The elders spoke of its origins in hushed tones, warning the villagers that the drum must never be touched, never played, for it was a sacred object that held the spirits of their ancestor spirits, who would demand a price if disturbed. But no one could deny its power, for when the drums sounded, the village felt its call, its presence. It was as though the earth itself was speaking, calling the dead to walk among the living. And for generations, the villagers had honored the drum, kept it safe, and respected its ancient warning. Yet, even the strongest of beliefs could falter in the face of temptation. It began with Adebisi, a woman who was both beloved and feared. In the village, she was the daughter of a renowned warrior, someone who had been raised to understand the balance of power and sacrifice. Her beauty was not just in her appearance, but in the strength of her character. She had a reputation for standing firm in the face of adversity, and it was this strength that would eventually lead her to the heart of the midnight funeral drum's curse. Adebisi had married Olamide, a young man of great promise. He was a warrior like her father, strong and proud, with the kind of spirit that could charm anyone. Together, they were a formidable pair. But as the months passed after their wedding, Olamide began to change. His once vibrant demeanor grew dark, his nights restless, his eyes haunted by a presence he could not shake. Adebisi tried to understand. She knew that Olamide had always been sensitive, a man who carried the weight of his emotions like a burden. But this was different. Something had begun to gnaw at him, pulling him away from her, from the village, and even from the life they had built together. At first, Olamide spoke of strange dreams of a shadowed figure standing beneath the midnight funeral drum, its face obscured by darkness. In these dreams, he heard the drum calling to him, its rhythmic beat growing louder, more insistent, until it felt as though his very soul was being pulled into its depths. The dreams haunted him. His nights were filled with restless tossing and turning, his body drenched in sweat. Adebisi tried everything's sacred herbs, prayers, even visits to the village elders, yet nothing could lift the shadow that clung to him. Then came the night when he disappeared. It was a moonless night, the air thick with the scent of rain. Olamide had risen from their bed, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. He had spoken not a word, simply pulling on his cloak and heading toward the forest. Adebisi had tried to stop him, but he had only shaken his head, his expression one of desperate resolve. "I must go," he had said in a voice so quiet it barely reached her ears. "The drum calls to me," and with that, he was gone. Hours passed, but Olamide did not return. Adebisi had gone into the forest herself, calling his name. Searching through the dense undergrowth, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. But there was nothing. Only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the distant echo of the midnight funeral drum beating in the darkness. As the days turned into weeks, the village began to speak of the midnight funeral drum with growing trepidation. Strange occurrences had begun to plague the land. The crops that had once flourished with ease now withered in the fields. The animals fell sick, some even dying under mysterious circumstances. The air was thick with unease, and the villagers whispered that the spirits of the dead were restless. Angry at the disturbance caused by Olamine's disappearance, Adebisi could not bear the thought of losing him. She knew, deep down, that the midnight funeral drum had claimed him, the same drum that had called to him in his dreams, the same drum that had brought terror to their doorstep. It was the drum that held the power to raise the dead, to bind them to the earth, but at a terrible price. The elders had warned her not to pursue it. They told her that once a soul was claimed by the drum, there was no turning back. Yet Adebisi, love for Olamide, the man who had once stood by her side, gave her strength. She could not sit idly by while he was lost to the drum's dark power. It was then that Ikena, the oldest elder of Alakoro, approached her. His face was weary, his eyes burdened with the weight of knowledge. The midnight funeral drum is not just an object, Ikena explained, his voice heavy with the wisdom of many years. It is a being, an entity with its own will. It does not just summon the dead, it feeds on the grief, the sorrow, the fear of the living. And once it has chosen a soul, it will not release it until its price is paid. Adebisi listened intently, her heart pounding in her chest. She needed to know what she was up against. There is only one way to end the curse, Ikena continued, his voice low. You must sacrifice something precious to use someone new. Love. The drum will not cease until it has fed on the pain of a broken heart. Adebisi's eyes filled with tears, but she did not falter. I will do it, she said, her voice steady. I will end the drum's curse. I will free Olamide. The night of the ritual came. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a pale light over the village. Adebisi stood in the clearing, where the midnight funeral drum rested, its ancient wooden frame glowing faintly in the moonlight. The air was thick with the weight of the spirits, their presence palpable in the stillness. Tund, Adebisi's younger brother, stood beside her, his face pale with fear. He had begged her to stay, to run, to leave the village before it was too late, but Adebisi had made her decision. I cannot leave, she said softly, her voice firm. This is the only way. The drumming began, slow and rhythmic, as though it were speaking to them, calling them to listen, to act. The sound echoed through the village, rising in pitch and volume as the minutes passed. Adebisi closed her eyes, her heart heavy with the weight of the sacrifice she was about to make. Her love for Olamide, for her village, for her people, was greater than her fear. She reached for the midnight funeral drum, her hands trembling, as they touched the cold, smooth surface of the ancient wood. The drum hummed under her fingertips, as though it were alive, as though it could feel her touch. Suddenly, there was a sharp, chilling sound of voice, low and haunting, calling her name, Adebisi. She turned, and there, standing before her, was Olamide. But it was not the Olamide she had known. His eyes were hollow, his face gaunt, his skin pale. He was a shell of the man she had once loved, consumed by the power of the drum. You cannot save me. Olamide's voice was a twisted echo, his words broken, disjointed. The drum has taken me. I am lost. Adebisi's heart broke, but her resolve remained. No, she whispered, stepping forward. You are not lost. I will bring you back. But as she spoke, the earth beneath her feet trembled. The midnight funeral drum beat faster, louder, its rhythm now a frantic, unrelenting pulse. Tund shouted, his voice filled with fear. Adebisi, stop, you're giving yourself to it. Adebisi did not answer. She closed her eyes, reaching for the spirits of her ancestors, calling on their strength, their wisdom. She offered herself, her life, her soul, to end the curse. The drum's power surged, a force so overwhelming that it felt as though the world itself would shatter. And then there was silence. Adebisi fell to her knees, exhausted, her body trembling from the ritual. The air was still. The midnight funeral drum lay silent before her. Olamide's twisted form faded into the darkness, his soul freed, his torment ended, the village was saved. The ending, in the days that followed, the village of Alakoro began to heal. The crops returned to their fields, the animals grew strong again, and the fear that had once gripped the hearts of the villagers began to fade. Adebisi's sacrifice had broken the curse, and with it, the midnight funeral drum was silenced forever. The villagers gathered together to give thanks, their voices rising in unison to honor the spirits that had protected them. But despite the peace that had settled over the land, Adebisi's heart remained heavy. She had lost so much in her journey Olamide, the life they had built together, and the innocence of her childhood. But she also gained something, a wisdom, a deeper understanding of the fragility of life and the strength of the human spirit. The village elders, who had once spoken of the drum with trepidation, now saw it for what it truly was, a reflection of the fears and desires of the people it had touched. It had fed on grief and sorrow, but it had also been a testaway for Adebisi to prove the depth of her love, her loyalty, and her courage. The curse had been broken not because of magic, but because of the purity of Adebisi's heart. As the village slowly returned to normal, Adebisi stood by the edge of the clearing, where the midnight funeral drum once lay. The drum was gone, its power dissipated, but its memory lingered in the air. A gentle breeze stirred the trees, and for a brief moment, Adebisi swore she could hear the faintest whisper of a drumbeat in the distance. It was not a call to death, but a rhythm of life, a reminder of the sacrifices that had been made, and the love that had saved them all. She closed her eyes, remembering Olamide, not the hollow, broken figure he had become, but the man he had been, strong, loving, and full of promise. He would never return, but his spirit would always be with her, in the land, in the people, and in the legacy of their love. And so, Adebisi continued to live in Alakoro, not as a woman haunted by the past, but as a woman who had faced darkness and emerged stronger. The village had survived, and it would thrive once more, thanks to the courage of one woman who was willing to give everything for the people she loved. The midnight funeral drum was gone, but its story would live unetched in the hearts of the villagers and pass down through generations. It would be remembered not as a symbol of terror, but as a symbol of sacrifice, love, and the unbreakable bond between the living and the dead. And as the sun set over Alakoro, Adebisi knew that, though the drum would never beat again, the lessons it had taught would echo forever in the rhythm of the village's heart.